This show contains explicit language and themes and is for entertainment only. We do not guarantee the accuracy of our content. This podcast is not for sensitive individuals, ideological or religious extremists, or little bitches. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as unto the Lord. Ephesians 5:22.
Welcome to the Unholy Generations podcast. We are your host, two first-degree atheists from the Satanic Illuminati Atheist One World Order. I'm Brother Michael.
Ryan.
Dick.
It's not going to catch on,
bit.
Michael.
That was a good bit. Could be an ass.
You gotta stop thinking it's going to catch on. You're not going to make it cool.
That's a good bit. I'm going to make it cool, damn it.
You can't make anything cool, Michael.
Shut up, bitch.
You fucking walk around in a fucking trench coat.
Hey, you know what? I get a lot of compliments on that trench coat.
Yeah, because they think that you're going to shoot them.
No, they don't. You remember that one really creepy gay guy when we walked into that costume shop and he was like, wow, I love your coat. I'm like, oh, thanks. And he's just like standing there staring at it like, wow, love your coat.
I don't remember,
you remember that? We were in like Galveston or some shit. Anyway, that was probably one of the creepiest moments with my trench coat. But anyway, so today's episode is about our experience with the Mormon missionaries. And then we went back later and did a bunch of research about some of the stuff we didn't understand or stuff that didn't make sense. And this is going to be kind of an amalgam of our experience as well as our research. Just kind of a disclaimer here. We did a lot of research and we found a lot of stuff. We couldn't fit it all into one episode. This may end up being a two-parter anyway, but there's still a lot more out there besides what we tell you this episode and probably the next one. So some of the sources we used, the biggest one I used was MormonThink.com. Really great resource for a lot of stuff. If you don't know about Mormonism, they pretty much reveal a lot of stuff, even the stuff the church doesn't want you to know.
And for me, my source I think was kind of interesting. It's a Catholic website from when I was like really into that shit. And it's called the Institute of Catholic Culture, which in today's political climate kind of sounds a little bit alt-rightish. But trust me, it's not. And the reason I like this website is that they have like a whole bunch of resources spanning back from like 2007 till now. And they really go after other religious organizations and stuff like that. They just happen to have a blind spot for the Catholic ones.
Yeah.
So that's a good resource. And then I also used Utah Lighthouse Ministry.
Okay.
Which has a lot of stuff about Mormonism.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you want to look that up.
All right, cool, Vince. So you want to get started?
Where do we start?
Well, let's start. Okay, so I guess the best way to approach this is talk about the meetings and then sprinkle in our research in with our experience as we're talking about it. So let's just start with the first Mormon meeting. Okay, so our first meeting with the Mormons, there was a lot of kind of getting to know each other. So they wanted us to share our religious backgrounds and come to understand why we had an interest in learning about the church, and we told them about our atheism and about our deconversion stories. We basically told them we would rank about a 6 on the Dawkins scale, which is basically saying, I can't know for certain, but I don't think God is very probable. Mm-hmm. Then they asked us, what do you think happens after you die? Of course, we said, we're not really sure, but the evidence seems to point to probably nothing.
Yeah.
And it's important to focus on our current life and, all that stuff. And then they asked us, what is your purpose here in life? And we just said, we largely determine our own purpose. And then we got to the fun stuff. So this is pretty much all us talking. They're asking us questions, we're talking. The first thing they say to us as a pitch of Mormonism is, hey, have you ever been to Africa? How do you know it's there?
I thought they were going a completely different direction with that.
Me too. I thought it was going to be like a faith thing.
I thought they were going to go like straight into the hardcore recruiting, like, how would you like to take a trip to Africa?
Oh, see, I thought it was going to be like, how do you know Africa's there? Have you ever been there? Then you don't really know it's there. You have faith that it's there. Like, that's what I thought they were going to do. But actually, they took a totally different direction. So.
I mean, it wasn't too far off from that, though, was it?
Yeah, not really. So basically what they said is, they asked us, well, how do you know it's there? We said, well, you can fucking fly there. There's pictures. There are, people living there. That we have black people in America. Like, it's pretty fucking obvious that Africa exists. And he says, well, you can say that God can be verified in the same way that Africa can be verified, except you verify God through Scripture. And so right off the bat, they hit us with an equivocation fallacy.
Yeah.
So that's not really the same thing. Like, I mean, that would be the same thing if, like, Africa was a mythical place like Atlantis and no one had been there.
Yeah.
And except for like a handful of people who said they saw it in like a vision, and a guy claimed that he was from there, but everybody saw him be born like a normal person and everything like that. And then when he died, other people claimed that they saw him go to Atlantis. Then Africa would be analogous to heaven.
Or it would even be analogous if it was nowhere to be found right now, but our only attestation for the existence of Africa was some 2,000-year-old book. Yeah,
and we would have like Africa atheists. we'd be Afro-Gnostic.
Afro-Gnostic.
We'd be skeptical of the existence of Africa.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine we were both kind of rolling our eyes at that one because that was incredibly stupid.
Oh, no, we were absolutely polite, Michael. We had to entice them into coming back.
Well, I mean, we didn't say anything. Like, we just kind of let that slide. And we just kind of went like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. Well, that's true, I hadn't.
To be fair, they're not lying. Okay. So then I asked them about how the Holy Spirit would be made known that the Book of Mormon is true, because that's one of their big things, is that they say you can receive verification by sincerely reading and praying, and then God will reveal the truth of the Book of Mormon. And it's actually scriptural in Moroni 10 verses 4 and 5. There's a direct claim that says that. And so they were talking about trying to explain to us what it's like when the Spirit is present, and they pointed to Doctrines and Covenants, chapter 9, verses 7 and 8, describing like a burning in the bosom. And they said like evidence would be largely spiritual in nature, i.e. in the form of emotions, the fruits of the Spirit, basically, like in Galatians 5, 22 and 23, I think.
Yeah, so what you're saying is basically atheists have sort of like a force field around them when it comes to Mormon evangelization.
I guess so.
Yeah, because that's one thing that I consistently felt throughout this entire set of meetings was that we were absolutely immune to everything, every technique that they were bringing. Yeah. Like, it just completely didn't apply to us at all, because it was like they were presupposing that they could prove, or that we could come to believe in God really easily, or that we believed in spiritual evidence, whatever the fuck that is.
Yeah, like, basically, if you are already inclined to believe like God and the afterlife and all that is a fact, then they just sort of give you a different narrative to fit that belief, So it's a lot easier to convince people that already believe. So I think that's one of the things they weren't really trained very well to deal with, is people who don't already believe, except for the big guy. There were like 3 missionaries the first time. 2 of them stayed with us for the second meeting, and then only 1 of them stayed with us for the third meeting. The cast kind of kept rotating a little bit, but one of them, the guy who stayed with us through all 3 meetings, he was actually pretty good, because he directly answered our questions and tried to explain things in a way that made sense, that fit the narrative of the Book of Mormon.
Right.
And then the other guys were more like, well, how does that make you feel? And we're like, that's not going to work on us. And there was actually another guy, he pointed to Doctrines and Covenants. This was the guy who was with us through 2 of the meetings. He kept saying that you'll know in your mind and in your heart. Mm-hmm. And they gave us sort of a brief testimony. We only saw this missionary one time, but he basically talked about how he grew up in the church, and he was not a consistent practitioner. And in his early 20s, he decided, you know what, I got to go out and find my own way and find the truth for myself. And he kept saying that when he would read the Book of Mormon, there was like a familiarity in his soul, and like he knew the truths beforehand, which obviously he would have if he was, raised in the religion. That's a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously if he had been raised in it, there would be like familiarity when he read it, because he would have been hearing that shit all his childhood. Then he kind of mentioned this and he was like, yeah, I guess that is true. And he goes on and he says he, used that challenge in Moroni 10 verses 4 and 5, and he prayed to see if it was true. And he was shown the truth of the gospel. And he continues to see the truth of the gospel like in his everyday life. And he's seen like his life with the gospel and his life without it. And he was just so much more happy with it. And it felt right. And I asked him, okay, so you said there was like more truth in the Mormon religion than all the other ones you looked at, which he only seemed to look at like Christian religions. He didn't go to like Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam or anything like that.
Which if he had, I mean, there'd be no contest, right?
So I asked him, what was the most convincing piece of evidence to you? And he pointed to the word of wisdom, and actually another missionary in our third meeting did this, and we'll get to that later, but he basically pointed to the word of wisdom, which is in Doctrines and Covenants, chapter 89, and it's the rule that you can't drink or smoke or do drugs or have coffee or tea or anything like that. And he said he tried it out and was more happy. I think we can just attribute that to like, being fucking healthy. Right?
Yeah.
You feel better,
Yeah, I think you and I make a pretty good case study on this. Like you, Mr. fucking Buddhist monk over there with your no caffeine and like drinking once a millennium or something like that. Like, yeah, I can understand, but you don't need Mormonism for that, do you?
Yeah, no, you really don't. You just need to make the active decision. Hey, I want to be healthier. Like that's all. Yeah. That's all it takes. Like
yeah, you don't need God I have to make the active decision that hey, I don't.
Wherever you fall on that scale, wherever you fall.
Yeah, on a scale of Mike to Ryan, yeah.
It's even funnier because anybody listening to this doesn't really know what we look like, like,
yeah, they never will.
They're just like, does Ryan weigh like 400 pounds? And like, is Mike this chiseled Adonis? Like, how much disparity is there between these two individuals?
Well, I will tell you, no on both accounts.
Yeah, right. Spoilers.
Yeah, I already told them what you look like. You look like an Arab terrorist.
That's not really coat. Specific. Unless they're like really racist. They're like, oh yeah, I know what that looks like.
Well, yeah, I mean, who's gonna go around calling you an Arab terrorist if they're not your friend? Racist people, yeah. Michael. Racist
so all the racists out there maybe have like a vague idea of what I look like, but it's probably wrong.
Yeah, all of our racist listeners.
Oh shit, okay. But then they went on to talk about the nature of the Godhead and how in Mormonism they believe that the Trinity is actually 3 separate personages, but they are united in the same goal. That's why they're referred to as one God, even though they're 3 separate personages. And according to the gospel principles, we can know God if we believe that he exists, which that seems like obvious. You can know God if you believe he exists. Are you shitting me? Like if you already accept the premise that God exists, you're like, oh yeah, I know God.
And the sky is blue specifically because you believe
it's blue. Yeah, pretty much. It's the same example. You also have to study the scriptures, pray, and follow all the commandments. But that was kind of the dry part of the.
So I do take a lot of comfort from that, knowing that common purpose unites people as one being. So like you and I making this podcast, Michael,
we are one being.
We are one person. So, I mean, hey, that's why my name is Michael and Ryan.
That's what it is. But it's only that way when we're making the podcast, and then when we're done making the podcast, your name immediately changes to something else.
Yeah.
But then they went on, oh, this was fun. They did some criticisms of science. I think the line of reasoning in their brain was like, oh shit, we're not able to, convince them with emotional appeals. Let's turn to science.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Was this the meeting where they tried to make a football reference first?
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
There was this part where I think it was actually before this, but they were like,
yeah, right before they led into the science thing.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, Michael and I both don't know anything about sports ball, so we didn't let them go for too long. But they were gonna head right into it. Like, what's your favorite football team? Well,
yeah, we were both like, we don't follow sports ball. So then they immediately go to, okay, who's your favorite Lord of the Rings character? Which, to be fair, I mean, they know their audience at least. They're like, okay, not sports. What about Lord of the Rings? But I remember that's how they described the Godhead. They were like, think of one elf as being one, but then like an army of elves being one also, because they're united in purpose, and that was their analogy for the Godhead. So that's what they were talking about there.
I mean, like, I've been in the army, and I can kind of understand what they're getting at by saying that, but like, there's a lot of people who like hook up in the army and get married in the army, so and they're still in. So is it like when two people in the army have sex, is it just kind of like technically masturbation?
Are they having sex with that person, or are they having sex with the entire army?
Oh, sometimes it's hard to tell, Michael.
I guess so. So after that, they went into some criticisms of science. They were saying that old line, like, oh, you know how scientific truth keeps changing? And at that point, I was like, well, no, that's not really what's going on. Is we're just getting more reliable information, so we expand our understanding based on more reliable information. And I immediately drew a parallel between that and saying like, hey, you guys in the Mormon church, you have like a very live religion in the sense that you guys still have like prophets who are, actively working, and when one prophet steps down, another one takes his place. So you guys seem to have a system where like you're still prophesying stuff, and it's not like closed like it is for Protestants and Catholics where there are no more prophets. It's just the Bible and that's it. But then they basically said that the prophets only change structural aspects of the religion. They don't actually change any of the doctrine or add anything, or sometimes I think on like major issues, for example, like the black people thing they had to change in 1978, that was a reinterpretation of the scriptures, but not in addition.
Right. So they also said whenever they do change something that's theological in nature, it's just adding more truth or clarifying what was said before. So basically exactly what they were trying to prove with the whole science point.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same fucking thing, but they're like, oh no, this is different though, because God.
Yeah. Yeah, so see, the difference is that science doesn't rely on God, and this does.
That actually is the only difference. Yeah. That is the only fucking difference. Yeah. And then they were trying to go with this appeal, like essentially saying, because scientific truths keep changing and God is always the same and we can know God through our like feelings and emotions, they're basically trying to say like feelings should trump what can be demonstrated. Like,
which admittedly is a good recruiting technique.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. They were basically trying to get us to engage in emotion-based reasoning, but use that to bypass our critical thinking in order to accept the claims, which is like a really good technique.
Yeah, they should have known that atheists don't have emotions.
We don't have souls.
Yeah.
We're like gingers.
Well, no, actually the only emotion that we have is anger and bitterness.
That's what it is. And like in hate for all things biblical.
Yeah. Yeah, just look at that Hitchens guy. He was so angry all the time.
Yeah, so like when you become an atheist, you basically like grow a neck beard and then wear kitschy t-shirts and drink coffee all the time and just like be a dick to everybody.
Of course.
That's what it is to be an atheist.
Yeah, and baby sacrifice on Saturday.
Absolutely. Yep. And then you become part of the atheist Illuminati church. We're still first degree atheists, but once we get like 20 listeners, we'll be promoted to second degree atheists.
Yeah, we're
so that works.
It's a tier system based on listeners to your atheist podcast.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much. Pretty much. Unless we do like other stuff, like, we're going to go at some point, we're going to talk to street preachers. That works as credit towards our next degree.
Yeah, so wait a second. So that would mean like Seth Andrews from The Thinking Atheist is like a 33rd degree atheist?
Oh, he's like at least like 31st for sure. Yeah. He's up there.
So we're going to get more like professional as we go up in the degrees?
I know, it's weird. But that's
fucking retarded.
That's how it goes, you know? And then at the top is like, I guess it was Hitchens and then he died and now it's like Dawkins or something. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, who is the atheist pope right now?
I don't know. We have to look into it. They're all wearing masks when we go to our meetings, so it's really hard to tell.
Okay. All right, so where were we?
Okay, so then comes like kind of the most interesting part of the whole experience in the first meeting was they were telling us to experiment and test with the words of the Book of Mormon to know if they're true. And so in response to that, we were like, okay, they gave us some readings to do. So we did readings, we kept prayer journals, and I kept audio records. And it was funny going into this because that's what they asked to do. We're like, okay, that's reasonable. We can do that. But going into this, we had like a precautionary agreement that if one of us started to get converted, we would have a come away from Jesus meeting.
Yeah, which basically the ceremony is like a reverse baptism. So
Pretty
you
much.
dry off and then the oil is wiped off from your forehead and you have to do the reverse sign of the cross and that basically undoes it.
Pretty much, yeah. Because magic. It's interesting that they told us to test the words of the scripture because, biblically speaking, God is not supposed to be tested except for tithing. You can give him money and test him and see if he'll give you blessings. That's the only time you're allowed to test God. Mm-hmm. Because you got like chapters like in Deuteronomy 6:16, Isaiah 7:12, Matthew 4:7, Luke 4:9-12. All of these basically saying you shall not test your Lord. Mm-hmm. So this actually contradicts the Book of Mormon from a biblical perspective. So that's interesting.
Little boy at peace. What is this place? Beyond the stars. Open up your eyes. What are these things you're moving toward? Head so full of wonder. Worries in the past. Could it be that you are free at last? No! Little boy, you're going to hell! You set bad words for rushes and birds, and now this is your tale. You ain't going back to see Disneyland hell. Little boy, time for you to play. Hurting that bird and not going to church and staring at fool every day. Thought you were on bed, instead you're in hell. Hell is good, hell is good, hell. Oh, hell is good, hell is good, hell.
All right, so we're going over the book 23 Minutes in Hell, and we have the first section of the first chapter,
yeah.
which is 3 pages long, but Michael has told me it's full of shit. So
yeah, it's really bad, you guys. Like, I thought, oh, you know, this guy seems like an intelligent human being, and he says he did a lot of research, and then I just was wondering, does he know what research is?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time believing that, Michael.
Like, it's really bad. Like, he was like, yeah, he spent 7 years studying the Bible to match up the readings from the Bible to his experience. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's true. I think he just went like, hey Siri, give me all Bible quotes for hell, and then just copied them down regardless of the order or context. He just wrote them down.
Great.
Because a lot of these don't make sense. But yeah, so let's just get into this. So the chapter opens up, he's talking about his honeymoon. Mm-hmm. It's pretty dry, not a whole lot to talk about there. I just thought there was one thing in here that was kind of funny. They were talking about they went to Carmel, California, and they had like all these, you know, beautiful...
Was his husband hot?
Yeah, his name was Joe.
Joe, okay.
Joe. So they were, you know, sitting there and enjoying the view, and telling his wife told him this is probably the closest place to heaven anyone could experience while on the planet. And they were like, oh yeah, this is great. And, you know, when you think of a honeymoon, you're like, especially these people, these were probably like, they didn't have sex till marriage, so you'd think that's like the first thing they do.
Yeah, they're
all
like
that...
my cousins. The first kiss was on when they were getting married. And that's a true story.
Yeah, so like all that pent-up sexual energy, you just think they just go for it. No, what are these two doing? They're sitting there reflecting on the goodness of God in their lives.
Ah, yes.
That's it, on their honeymoon.
It's a fun honeymoon.
I really hope that wasn't like... You know, they were sitting there like, oh man, I'm regretting this marriage now.
No, Michael, that's Christian foreplay.
Yeah. Oh, okay, so then he's talking about, apparently this was only 2 weeks before his visit to hell. So this is like right when they're first married. So he gave us a little bit of time framing with that.
Okay.
And then we get into it. So the first section of the chapter is called The Journey. And I don't know if you guys remember when I was talking about the introduction, he was saying that he was standing outside and he was like looking at the night sky or something, and then all of a sudden, boom, he was taken to hell.
Yeah, like Kenny.
Yeah, well, now his story is starting to unravel. Because
Okay.
he's like, that was the night I was catapulted out of my bed into the very pit of hell. So apparently he was in a bed.
Well, maybe he was sleeping outside.
He threw down like a cot.
Yeah.
He wanted to go camping.
Yeah, he didn't say where the bed was, right?
So I think he just needs to tighten up his story. It's starting to fall apart here. He's unraveling.
Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, Michael.
Okay. I'm just saying the fact that he was in a bed would give the experience different connotations.
He said he was catapulted. Maybe it was like what was it, Halloween? The bed flipped up. Maybe he was catapulted into the street. Yeah.
So then it kind of picks up where he left off about being in the jail cell. You know, Hell's processing.
The Hell jail cell. Yeah.
The Hell jail cell. And
Hell.
he actually says, I felt as though I was in a temporary holding area, a place where a prisoner would wait his final hours before meeting a far more terrifying destiny. Which is exactly the conclusion we came to.
Yeah.
It's exactly what we thought. And then he goes and he does a Bible quote. So, before I tell you about this Bible quote, I don't know if he's like just ignorant about what the Bible says, or if he's just being really dishonest.
Yeah.
Like,
well, part of proof texting is being dishonest.
Yeah, but he doesn't know how to even do that properly. Like, it's so bad. Mm-hmm. Like, it's bad.
Right.
Part of it comes
Lay
from...
it on me.
Yeah, so he's quoting Isaiah here, which is Old Testament. We talked about that last time, that the Old Testament doesn't have any concept of hell. Mm-hmm. So any Old Testament quotes he gives us are already flawed on that basis. But he quotes Isaiah 24:22 and says, "They shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison." Mm-hmm. So my main contention here is, like, there's commas in between "as prisoners are gathered in the pit," which makes it seem like it's a simile. Mm-hmm. Like, they're saying they're going to be gathered together, kind of like this other thing where prisoners are gathered in the pit. So that could be it could just be a mistranslation for the word prisoner from the original Hebrew. I couldn't find this text in Hebrew and compare it with like a Hebrew to English kind of deal. So I can't verify that. But given the time period that the Old Testament was written in, this could actually be a direct allusion to Roman prisons, which were built underground. They were actually the world's first prisons that were built underground. Or it could be a direct allusion to what people kind of, the traditional world model with the dome and the... Yeah, it could be kind of like that, because in the Old Testament you get this kind of weird snow globe planet.
The firmament theory.
Yeah, and then there's like Sheol is right below the earth. It's kind of like that. So it could be that, but it's not very clear. But anyway, we go on to Proverbs 7:27, and all it says, word for word, Proverbs 7:27 refers to chambers of death and hell.
Okay.
He doesn't even give us the verse. Like, I had to go look it up.
There's no other context that you could possibly come up with where that would be referring to something other than, on a vision quest to hell or whatever.
You know what it was talking about?
What?
So, the actual verse is, her house is a way to hell, going down to the chambers of death. It was actually a warning against being seduced by prostitutes. So, like, that's what that whole proverb is.
Wait a second. What street was he on?
So apparently he was getting a little demon nasty while he was down there.
Maybe the pit is like a metaphor.
Remember we said it was a gay bar.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So then he goes on to say, he talks about his experience being done there. It's also his use of chapter notes was kind of weird. So he said, I noticed that I had a body, one that appeared just as it is now. And for some reason he felt he needed to have a chapter note for that. Mm-hmm. And he gave 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, so he had to have a reference for his personal experience.
So he had to have a reference for the fact that he had a body.
Yeah.
Because
if he were there, he wouldn't have noticed otherwise.
And he gave a lot of really specific
yeah, Michael,
stuff
it's like
for this.
when you had to write a paper in middle school and you don't want to do the citation, so you just put a whole bunch of random citations and hope that the teacher doesn't check.
But he quoted Matthew 10:28, and he didn't even give us the whole quote. It just said, "Fear him who is able to destroy both the soul and the body." And this is when Jesus was talking to his apostles about going to preach in hostile territory. And what he was basically saying was, hey, don't be afraid of the people who are going to try to kill you with your radical ideas, because God's going to do a lot worse to you. Nothing really to do with what's going on with him here.
Yeah, it's still crazy, but...
It's still crazy. And then he quotes Matthew 5:29, and didn't give us the whole quote again, but it just says, "And not that they whole body should be cast into hell." Mm-hmm. And that comes from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. It's actually that bit following, if you look at a woman with lust in your... Yeah, you commit adultery in your heart. And then he follows that with, if one eye is, to offend that law, then you should tear it out rather than be sent to hell. That's what he was referring to.
Stick an ice pick in it.
Yeah, some shit like that. But again, nothing to do with what he's actually talking about. Mm-hmm. Proverbs 1:12, "Let us swallow them up alive like Sheol, and whole like those who go down into the pit."
Okay, so this guy, seriously, I bet he had an electronic Bible and he did a global search for certain words.
That seems exactly like what he did.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the bar. Like any verse that had the word bar, he just copy and pasted to his footnotes.
Now, the funny thing is, the kind of the common string between these are either the fact that there's the word body or the word whole, like whole body. So you have an entire body when you're in hell. But in this context, whole doesn't refer to like an entire body. Whole means, in the Hebrew, more accurately translates to when someone is rich. Yeah, so what they were talking about is basically finding people who were like infidels and then killing them and taking all their money and then splitting the money amongst themselves. Yeah. Again, nothing to do with what the fuck they're talking about.
Totally fitting, Michael, totally.
Bag. He just didn't even know what that verse meant. He just like, the word hole's in it, therefore it's gotta work.
So Michael, you recently graduated from college. Yeah. If you handed in a paper with this type of scholarship, what would have happened?
I would have been very disappointed in myself.
in your grade as well.
I got a failing grade as well.
Oh my god. I love it.
Then he's in this jail cell, right? And 2 enormous beasts appear. Mm-hmm. And these beasts were approximately 10 to 13 feet tall. And yes, he needs another chapter note for this one. For some reason.
Okay.
And guess what? The two he did Deuteronomy 3:11 and Genesis 6:4. Both of the verses in the Bible talking about giants.
Okay.
Yeah, like things can be big is basically his point.
Michael, think about how ridiculous this is. This is like if you and I got together and I was like, "Hey, dude, what's up? How have you been today?" And you said, "Oh, well, I went to the store. Here's my citation."
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
You don't need to cite personal anecdote.
It's ridiculous.
You might as well cite himself.
Well, the first one is a citation of the giant king Og in Deuteronomy, and he's just saying, "Look, things can be big." And then Genesis 6:4 is talking about how things got big. It was so basically, God got pissed off at humans, and he was like, "Fuck you guys, I'm shortening your lifespans to only 120 years, because fuck you guys."
Yeah, we already beat that record.
Yeah. And then immediately it says, "There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of man and bore children with them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the giants."
Sexy.
And he then goes into his whole spiel about the term sons of God refers to fallen angels, and the giants were the kids that they had with the women. And There were no fallen angels. There was no fall.
Okay, so I've read a lot of biblical scholarship, and the problem is that nobody knows what the fuck that verse means. The sons of God and sleeping with the women of whatever.
Well, they wouldn't have been like fallen angels because there was no rebellion in heaven. That wasn't a thing for Jews.
Yeah, that was what, Milton?
Yeah, that was where the story came from, and it was mostly based on his readings in Revelation and kind of like what he took from that.
Yeah.
But it was something that was Christian, not Jewish, and that's Old Testament.
But you know what I'm saying? Like that verse, like nobody knows the Nephilim, which is the giants. Nobody knows what the Nephilim are, and nobody knows how to interpret that verse. It's a big mystery in biblical scholarship.
Yeah,
nobody
it's
knows.
just kind of one of those weird things. Like,
but there's a lot of people who say that they know though because they prayed real hard about it.
Yeah, right. God revealed it to them.
Yeah.
So after he gives this unnecessary chapter note, he then goes on to say, "I recognize that they were entirely evil, and they were gazing at me with pure, unrestrained hatred, completely paralyzing me with fear." And they have names, too. They were Evil and Terror.
Ooh, okay.
These creatures were an intensely concentrated manifestation of these two forces. So then he says, "I still had no idea where I was, and I felt utterly panicked," which makes sense, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So now he's sitting in his cell, two giant monsters appear, and apparently they're manifestations of evil and terror. And then he starts to describe them, and he needs a footnote to do it.
Of course. Because, God, this is so fucking stupid.
It is retarded. So each giant beast resembled a reptile in appearance.
Yeah.
But took on human form.
It's David I. It's the Rothschilds.
So this is the weirdest part, though. Their arms and legs were unequal in length, out of proportion, without symmetry. Like, what?
Oh, Michael, you know what? You know what he's referring to. Okay, so you and I are just about to watch Samurai Jack. You know the character Aku.
Aku.
Yeah, that means evil in Japanese. So that's one of
well,
the
hold on,
creatures,
Ryan. You need a footnote for that.
I have I'll provide the footnotes in the description. But Aku in that show, he's a shapeshifter, and you see a lot of the times he's moving his arms and they're different lengths. I mean, it's definitely who he's talking
I think so.
about.
Which it's kind of weird because like usually creatures have symmetrical bodies, mostly because that's necessary for like movement and being able to function.
Yeah.
That apparently is not a thing in hell. Like, apparently the devil's like really bad at designing demons. He sucks at it. So then he says, he describes the first beast. It had bumps and scales all over its grotesque body, and huge protruding jaws, and gigantic teeth, and large shrunken-in eyes. This creature was stout and powerful with thick legs and an abnormally large feet. And of course, he needs a footnote for this. So let's see what he put in the footnote.
Let's see how he squeezed this out of his Bible.
So he went to the Book of Job for this one, which I didn't think.
Is he talking about the behemoth?
No, not even. No.
Okay, let's see where he goes.
He so in this he cite quoted Job 33:22, and that's right in the middle of the conversation with Job, Zophar, Eliphaz, Elihu, and Bildad. I think I said all those names right. When basically Job was like complaining and be like, "Oh, God's punishing me and I don't know why," and then all the group of 4 people were like, "Yeah, fuck you. You're probably a piece of shit. And you did something wrong." And the only quote he gave from that was, "His soul draws near to the pit, and his life to the executioners." And this is Elihu trying to convince Job to pray and apologize for whatever he did wrong. And
wait, so
that's it.
So Elihu said that?
Yeah.
But the point of that in that passage is that those guys are wrong.
Yeah, like that's the thing. It doesn't make any sense. Like what? I don't know why he included this.
This is the best proof texting. This is the best proof texting I've ever seen.
It's ridiculous. Then the other one he did was Deuteronomy 32:24, and he gave the quote, "I will also send amongst them the teeth of beasts with the poison of serpents of the dust. And he actually kind of qualifies this by saying, this scripture speaks of what happened to the Israelites for their rebellion. And I was like, good job. You recognize that this doesn't have anything to do with what you just said.
Actually acknowledge the context.
I know, right? Good job. And then he keeps going and says, if this is what happened on earth, how much worse will it be in hell where his wrath is poured out? And I was like, you just finished it up with a bunch of bullshit conjecture.
Therefore, fucking Aku is waiting for you.
So those were just like two garbage site texts. Like they didn't add anything. So, apparently this weird, amorphous, scaly, bumpy, grotesque, jaw-protruding, gigantic teeth, and large eye-shrunken beast was pacing violently around like a caged bull, and its demeanor was extremely ferocious.
Okay.
And the second beast was taller and thinner, with very long arms and razor-sharp fins covering its body.
That seems impractical.
Yeah, like, what would that be for? Like, why would you need that many fins?
It's to look intimidating, I guess.
I can swim really, really well.
No, because having too many fins
fucks you up.
Yeah, it would mess with your hydrodynamics.
You wouldn't be able to go anywhere. You just start moving your arms and you just go random directions. Wherever the current happened to catch your fins. Oh, God. And protruding from its hands were claws nearly a foot long. Think about that. Claws a foot long.
Ow, he probably has a problem with them breaking all the time. Like,
how does he do anything? Like, he can't even walk. Like, he's gonna walk on his elbows.
I am a beast. I have foot-long nails. Ow, fuck.
Damn it. Son of a bitch.
Oh, I broke down the middle again. Damn it.
They have to use, like, hedging shears to clip his nails. Apparently its personality seemed different from the first beast. It was certainly no less evil, but it remained rather still, so it was very, very chill, very relaxed. And they could talk. They were talking to each other, so the creatures were speaking to each other. I could not identify what language it was, but somehow I understood their words.
Motherfucker.
Because that makes sense. They were awful, terrible, blasphemous language that spew from their mouths expressing extreme hatred for God. Footnote. So let's look at what he did here. Romans 1:28-31, and this is just Paul talking to the Romans about sinners, and he says, they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, but filled with all unrighteousness, murder, haters of God, unmerciful. So this is not the full quote. It's just kind of broken up across the three verses. Mm-hmm. And he actually says after this, although their verses are referring to people, the power that influences them is demonic. Mm-hmm. And he kind of goes on with this to basically his point is that using naughty language is demonic.
Of course.
Yeah, so that's, yeah. So then he goes on to Ezekiel 28:14-16, and this is where just Ezekiel is prophesying shit. And he says, you are the anointed cherub who covers, therefore I cast you as a profane thing. And he actually says this is a description of Lucifer. But it's not. He's fucking wrong, because if you go back like two verses, it specifically says that he's talking about the king of Tyrus. Like, it says specifically.
Yeah, and even that wouldn't fit the typical Christian mythology, because Satan isn't supposed to be a fucking cherub.
That too. I mean, he was like basically an archangel. So that was just a garbage quote. Then he uses Ezekiel 22:26, and this is when Ezekiel was talking about how God is mad at the Israelites. And he says, I, God, am profunded, and in parentheses, degraded, vulgar language, blasphemous, among them, and he's talking about the priests. So he is profaned among the priests, right? Mm-hmm. And that's all he gave us. So apparently God was very upset that the priests were using naughty words about him.
So he needed to set a proof text saying that people blaspheme.
Yeah, but it's demonic though. Yeah, because of the last. So basically, this entire argument is contingent on the Ezekiel 28:14-16 quote, the one that he completely got wrong. Mm-hmm. that he thought was Lucifer, but it was actually King Titus. Yeah. So this whole argument just completely unravels, but I'll read you the last 2 verses and a case study that he cited.
Okay.
Psalms 139, verse 20. One of David's psalms to God when he was talking about like wicked men and stuff. He does that a lot. But he says, your enemies will take your name in vain. Oh, okay.
That happens.
Okay. Then he talks about the case study. So the last 2 biblical quotes were Ezekiel 22:26 and Psalms 139:20. Then he talks about a famous demon possession case of Cleana Viliuvana, I think is how you say that. And apparently it was very famous in its own right. I've never heard of this. Yeah, I've never heard of this, but there was a guy, Lester Summerall, I think he was a reverend. He wrote a book called Alien Entities. Mm-hmm. I kind of want to read that. And he talks about when he actually exorcised the demon from this girl. And the direct quote from the book is, there is a raging battle with the girl blaspheming God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Her eyes are burning coals of hatred and fire. And he italicized the word blaspheming because like, oh ho ho, demons use naughty language, therefore all naughty language is demonic. And so that was just really stupid. Yeah, this was just absolute garbage. But yeah, that was his whole argument, is that profaning against God is demonic in nature. But the way he was talking, so he's actually saying demonic possession is a real thing. Like, he's using that as a side quote.
Well, okay, so, yeah, I mean, a guy says that he went into hell and shit like that. He thinks demonic possession is a thing.
So I figured I'd just kind of address that. Demons and demonic possession, we actually have come a long way in that field and as to, like, figuring out what's actually happening there.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, what's happening with the seizures and the levitations and the contortions and stuff, those are just psychogenic seizures. And they're usually caused by underlying stress or emotional problems. And really anybody could get them. It's not like epilepsy where you have to have epilepsy in order to get the epileptic seizures. These are non-epileptic seizures that people have. There's actually a YouTube video I watched where Professor Michael Sperling at Jefferson University is the epilepsy specialist. He was actually being shown footage of somebody being possessed, and they were doing the whole shaky thing and the archy back and stuff, and he's like, yeah, no, that's a psychogenic seizure. I mean, here's one of a lady having one in a hospital, and she does the exact same thing. The only difference is that there's not a priest there, like, preaching at her while she's doing it.
You know, the cure is to spray them with holy water.
Apparently.
But I'm glad to know that my dog isn't demon
isn't possessed by demons.
He's just fucking epileptic.
You don't have to call the church. You just gotta make sure he has pillows around him. So then it goes on. Okay, so you remember earlier when he gave those beasts names and said how they were intensely concentrated manifestations of evil? And he then says, I couldn't identify what these beasts were yet, even though he already did.
He just described them.
He already did, but...
I'm willing to make wild conjecture.
But yeah, he says he couldn't identify what these beasts were yet, but I knew they meant me harm, and that requires a footnote.
Of course.
1 Corinthians 10:10, when Paul is talking about what not to do in order to avoid offending God, and it just picks up in the middle of the fucking verse. Nor complain, as some of them also complained and were destroyed by the destroyer. What the fuck? Like, what the fuck? And I think the reason he picked that is because it said the word destroyer, destroyed by the destroyer.
It came up in his global search.
It is in his Control F search.
Yeah.
And then Matthew 18:34, when Jesus is talking, it's that scene where he puts a kid on his lap and then talks to his disciples. Yeah, it was from that little speech. And basically, the only thing he gives us is deliver him to the torturers. Okay. Maybe that supports his point. Okay. I don't know. I looked up this verse. It really was just like him talking about hell and stuff, so maybe it kind of supports what he's saying.
Isn't that the one where he's like, suffer the little children to come upon me?
It was a little later than that, actually. It was a little later than that. But yeah, he was just sort of like talking about hell stuff. Mm-hmm. Like hell things.
Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah, it's, So that was, Again, another garbage footnote. And these don't get better. These get a lot worse. Anyway, I wanted desperately to get up and run, but as I lay on the wretched floor, I noticed that I had absolutely no strength in my body. I could barely move. Why didn't I have strength? I felt so defenseless, footnote. Yeah, you need a footnote for that.
And like, I'm sick, footnote.
That's okay, I got citation for it. That's what a doctor's note is. It's sickness citation. So this one is Isaiah 14, 9 through 10. Isaiah prophesying about the fall of the king of Babylon, and in general, like all the kings of all the nations and that kind of thing. And he says, hell from beneath you is excited about you to meet you at your coming. ... They, the kings of all nations, all shall speak and say to you, have you also become as weak as we? So, yeah, another misunderstanding between Sheol and hell, but that doesn't really track. Like, when you read the verse, it doesn't really sound like they're talking about physical or emotional or any of that kind of... They sounds like they're more talking about, like, loss of political power and status.
Yeah, I mean, that's
like
kind of what that verse is all about.
Yeah,
the
like,
fall of empires.
Exactly. It has nothing to do with, like, you know, being weak as far as physically or emotionally drained. It's just like, hey, I'm not a king anymore. This sucks. So, yeah, that was unnecessary. And then we go to... and then he directly quotes in the text... Psalm 88:4 says, I am counted with them that go down into the pit. I am as a man that hath no strength. So, yeah, maybe.
That's probably one of the best quotes so far.
I think that, yeah, that actually seems like it has something to do with what he's talking about. But again, it could kind of relate back to the Isaiah quote where it's like, there's no hierarchy of status or political power. Everybody's on the same level.
I'm sure it means probably like the exact opposite when you read it in context.
Yeah, so, anyway. It's kind of at the beginning of the psalm, so you really don't get into the rest of the psalm before you kind of understand what it is, but it seems like it might have something to do with what he's talking about. So then he talks more about how he was like feeling physical weakness, but it was also like mentally and emotionally draining and all that stuff. So he was just kind of laying there and wallowing. And then 2 more creatures appear. So now there's 4 creatures and a guy in the cell. So as they entered, suddenly the light vanished and became absolutely pitch black. And he was saying that this must be like the normal state. And I kind of knew he was going to say that, something like that, because I've heard both. Like, there's fire and brimstone in hell, but there's also complete darkness in hell. Like, you can't have both.
Because you're separated from the love of God.
But you can't have both. If you have fire, you can't also have darkness.
Yeah, maybe it's a dark fire?
Dark fire!
Yeah, fire that doesn't...
Black fire!
Emit
light.
Yeah. Blackfire. Wasn't that a character in Teen Titans or something?
It probably was. Yeah. So then he quotes in the text, Lamentations 3:6 states, He has set me in a dark places like the dead of long ago. So, yeah, it just seems more like it's a metaphor, because when you actually read it, like, Lamentations is a collection of poetry. Like, it's a bunch of poems about the destruction of Jerusalem. So, typically in poems, you get a lot of, like, metaphor and imagery, so it's probably not literal. Just saying.
Yeah, and that was written, if I'm not mistaken, during the Babylonian exile, right? When the Babylonians took over Israel and Jerusalem.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
And, yeah, like that's the same time that Ecclesiastes was written, where they're like, everything sucks and life isn't worth it and all that stuff.
They're very goth and very emo.
Yeah, so it's pretty easy to imagine what that metaphor must have been about.
Yeah.
Not that.
So, anyway, that was stupid. Then he goes on to say, one of the creatures picked me up. The strength of the beast was amazing. I was comparable to the weight of a water glass in his hand. So the way you pick up a water glass, he picked up this guy. So
first of all, how does he know? And second of all, I need a citation.
Oh, you get one. Very next sentence, Mark 5:3-4, describes a man possessed with a demon in these words. No one could bind him, not even with chains. The chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken into pieces. And then he says, instinctively, I knew the creature holding me had strength approximately 1,000 times greater than a man.
What?
I could not explain how I perceived that bit of information. So
I don't have to.
He just guessed. Yeah. So he just wild-ass assertions. Then the beast threw me against the wall. I crumbled onto the floor, and I felt as though every bone in my body had been broken. Footnote. So,
is he talking about the bones in Isaiah?
I
hope
nope.
So. Ah, damn it.
Nope.
Damn it.
Nope. So let's talk about the Mark 5:34 quote when he was talking about the beast picking him up.
Mm-hmm.
The actual quote, yeah, he's right. It is talking about the possessed guy. Specifically, there was like a guy who ran at Jesus who was possessed by demons as soon as he arrived at
I don't know.
Gadarenes, that's it.
Gadarenes. Okay.
There we go, Gadarenes.
Uh-huh.
And then he like exorcised the guy, and it was like super badass, right? And
Wait a second, hold on. How did Jesus exorcise people if he didn't have a cross yet?
Ooh. I don't know. Maybe he just did like the finger cross. Use sticks, 2 sticks. But it could be a possessed guy in the Bible, or it could be adrenaline rushes coupled with psychological
problems.
Problems.
Yeah,
maybe.
Also, okay, so about the Jesus thing too. Like, I wonder if he ever had a problem sprinkling people with holy water because, like, as soon as he touched it, it turned into wine. He's like, fuck.
That's not what I wanted. In those days, it was just his pee. That's the only way you could use a liquid without turning it into wine.
Yeah. Holy water is just when Jesus took a bath or whatever. And, he took a little pee in the river and the water was collected, and that's all the holy water we have now.
It was a big pee. It was a really big pee.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the footnote after he was talking about how he got thrown against the wall and broke every bone in his body, because that requires a footnote.
Mm-hmm.
First one is Psalms 50:22. And this is, again, David singing about his disdain for sinners. He says, "Now consider this, you who forget God, lest I tear you into pieces, there be none to deliver." So it's talking about David tearing people into pieces, not big, angry hell monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And also, they weren't even in hell in the context of this psalm.
Yeah.
So, again, not really helping your case.
He did a Control F search for pieces.
Or, I guess, like, tear pieces, tear into pieces, maybe? I don't know.
This is his last resort?
I guess, yeah. All that 7 years of research. The next one is Psalms 32:10. And this is, David kind of having an attitude change. He's rejoicing God now. And all it says is, "Many sorrows shall be to the wicked." And this is so vague. And actually, that's exactly kind of how it is in the psalm. I looked it up. On the front end of that, it's like, God is great! And then the beginning half of that psalm is, God is great! And then immediately following that is, God is great!
Uh-huh.
It's just this one negative thing thrown in there. So, I mean, it's so vague, it could literally mean anything. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll be torn apart by angry hell monsters.
God, that's extrapolation for the win.
Right? Like... Jeez. And then back to the book of Job. Job 31:3. Again, during the conversation with Job and the 4 people who were all wrong, but apparently they were using that conversation, specifically stuff they said. Or no, I'm sorry, this one is what Job said. Okay. So Job says, "Is it not destruction for the wicked and disaster for the wicked of iniquity?" And this is just when he's like asking why he's being punished.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with angry hell monsters.
The only come to think of it, the only angry hell monsters I can think of in the Bible is, I think, in Daniel when he talks about like the many-eyed monster.
Yeah,
that's the only thing I can think of.
At least it's better than what he's got.
Yeah.
It's better than what he has. He has one more. 1 Samuel 2:10. This one just says, "The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken into pieces."
Again, this is their last resort.
Yeah. Nothing about angry hell monsters there. Probably like, lynchings and stuff is more like what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. Like angry followers.
Also, there's the Beast of Revelation. That's the only other hell monster I can think of.
Mm-hmm. But, he didn't use any of that. So that was a thing. And then he was talking about how he broke all his bones, but he didn't feel really any of the pain. And he's like, how is it being blocked? And, it's italicized. So I think that's something that's going to be explained later. And it was like, it was Jesus.
Yeah, that's the power of Jesus.
I think that's
this was just a virtual reality tour of hell.
I think that's what it's going to be. It's like, it was Jesus. He blocked the pain for me because he's a cool dude. Oh, and this next section is just a bunch of torture porn.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You want to play a game?
Oh, yeah. So, the second beast with its razor-like claws and sharp protruding fins grabbed me from behind in a bear hug. As it pressed me into its chest, its sharp fins pierced my back. I felt like a ragdoll in its clutches in comparison to its enormous size. Then he reached around and touched and touched my and plunged his claws into my chest and ripped them outward.
At least you gotta reach around.
My flesh hung from my body like ribbons as I fell again to the cell floor. Footnote.
Okay, what could this footnote possibly fucking be?
So, when you think angry hell monster rape, you automatically think of the Book of Micah, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, the Book of Micah, my favorite.
Full of angry monster rape.
Right, what the fuck is the Book of Micah?
Book of Micah, chapter 3, verse 2. The quote just says, "You who hate God and love evil, who strip their skin from my people and the flesh from their bones." And then Bill goes on to say, this verse is talking about the country's leaders doing this to the children of Israel. And he actually admits this is not speaking of what's happening in hell. Gold star, Bill. I'm glad you caught that one.
God.
However, where do evil men get their inspiration? Hold on, Bill. Slow down. Where are you going with this? You were on a roll. What happened, man? To support the thought of devils inflicting pain, see Mark 5:5, which mentions cutting himself with stones. Damn it, Bill. God damn it. You were doing so well. And in case you're not keeping track, that he is referring to the possessed guy who charged Jesus at Gadarenes and was immediately exercised, but it did talk about some self-mutilation. So.
Yeah, because psychosis does that sometimes.
Yeah, but no, his connection there is demon-possessed guy self-mutilates, therefore demons mutilate. Therefore, I got mutilated.
Yes. Flawless logic. Flawless logic.
And he sticks the landing. Beautiful. There's more. There's more.
Okay.
1 Kings 18:28. ... And cut themselves ... until the blood gushed out of them.
What? That's it?
That's it. Again, people self-mutilating. I think they were possessed, but follow the same flowchart of logic.
You can't do that.
That's exactly what he did. It's exactly what he did.
You could make it say anything by doing that. You could be like,
that's exactly what he did.
And the Lord Jesus ... said ... I ... like ... to lay with men. You could literally do that.
Yeah, you can. So then he's got Mark 9:18-22, when Jesus is basically getting mad at his disciples who can't exorcise a demon from a child, so he's like kind of chastising them, and then he does it himself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And it says, the spirit seizes him, it throws him down, he foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and goes rigid, ... And often he was thrown him both into fire and into water to destroy him. Again, psychogenic seizures, not demons. But I don't even really know where he's going with this as far as how it relates to what he was talking about. Like, there's nothing about self-mutilation or cutting.
Okay, so maybe he's saying that it's kind of like the demon on the outside, cutting him and everything like that is like a physical representation of what was going on in these people's minds.
He's really bad at this.
Yeah.
He's really bad at this.
Hey, I tried.
So anyway, back to the torture porn. These creatures had no respect for the human body and how remarkably it was made. I've always taken care of myself by eating right, exercising, and staying in shape, but none of that mattered as my body was being destroyed right before my eyes.
I'm surprised he could write this with his dick in his hand.
And I don't think he meant to make this like funny, but he did when he the next thing I highlighted here was death penetrated me but eluded me. So he's getting double teamed by monsters and the Grim Reaper.
The Grim Reaper is not fun. It's all teeth. It's all teeth.
He just sticks his bony finger in there.
And it comes off.
Gotta dig it out.
Oh shit, I lost it.
The creatures seem to derive pleasure in the pain and terror that they inflicted upon me. Psalm 16 or 116:3 says, "The sorrows of death compassed me, and the pains of hell got hold upon me. I found trouble and sorrow. Oh, how I yearned for death, but there would be none." And a little bit of context, Psalms 116 verse 3, that's just David was rejoicing about God and basically that whole psalm. Yeah, this is again kind of another misunderstanding of the difference between Sheol and hell. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, when it says the pains of hell, I think that literally just means I'm dying, ow, this hurts. Mm-hmm. Like the pain of dying.
All right.
So that was The Journey, section 1 of the first chapter.
Wait, that was The Journey? What was the journey?
the being raped by angry hell monsters. That was the journey.
Horribly named chapter. What?
Yeah, I don't know how that relates to angry monster rape, but
wow. Okay, I'm very excited to see how this compares to Proof of Heaven.
Yeah. So the next section we'll do next time is The Living Dead, and this is a lot more pages, and there's almost an equivalent number of cite texts. That are all probably equally poorly done.
Alright, this will be a lot of fun.
Okay, so then we got to our second meeting with the Mormons, and this time it was only with 2 of the original 3. One of them had to go work, so he couldn't make it. We were at a Starbucks.
Yeah, and this was a terrible meeting for me because I was all the way over in San Antonio, and we had to rely on 2 public Wi-Fi. So Michael was on the Starbucks Wi-Fi, and I was on the university Wi-Fi. So the connection was like, when it actually showed up, it was like 144p, and it was only like the screen was only like receiving for about maybe 5 minutes of the hour. So the rest of the time it was just a frozen image, and it was like robot voice the whole time, like that fucking maid on the Jetsons. It's worse.
Well, we got through it though.
I barely got anything from this meeting.
That's all right. All right, we got some stuff. So we went over the readings they gave us last meeting, and the first one was the intro pages to the Book of Mormon. So one of the most striking things I got from that was the testimony of Joseph Smith. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and give you guys kind of an abbreviated history of the writing of Book of Mormon, you know, according to what we know through history and claims made by Joseph Smith. And we're going to sprinkle in some of our own research about certain topics. So in the 1820s, Joseph Smith Jr. goes to the forest and prays to God to ask what religion he should be a part of, and God tells him that none of the religions are right, and that later on the church will be restored. Now, that's really kind of not true, because what we find is that there are no accounts or documentation from him, family members, neighbors, anybody in the community verifying this event until after 1835, when the Book of Mormon was already written.
Not even his own mother, who wrote a biography.
Yeah, nothing like this seems to have ever happened. In fact, there are inconsistencies in the various versions told by Joseph Smith across the years. Details like his age, the circumstances of the vision, and who appeared to him change over time. So at the first time he talked about it, it was like just God, and then it was God and Jesus, and then it was like a bunch of different angels, and it just keeps changing, and they're like different circumstances, and it's really fucked. Mm-hmm. And there are also a large number of public accounts which describe strikingly similar events of having seen visions from various different individuals, including Asa Wilde, Elijah Smith, Solomon Chamberlain, James Marsh, Charles Finney, but most notable was Norris Stearns in 1815, who had practically an identical experience or an identical vision to that of Joseph Smith. Same circumstance, same vision, same everything, really. In fact, there was a LDS historian who was loyal to the church, but when he read the account, he was like, yeah, we're pretty sure that Joseph Smith may have taken that and made it his own. And that's someone who's loyal to the church. So.
Yeah, he said it was very imaginative or something like that, didn't he?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the guy. So then in 1823, the angel Moroni visits Joseph Smith three times in one night. Now, this is the part where, like, when I listen to the story, it really seems like someone's just making shit up as they go along, you know?
Yeah, it seems so disorganized.
Yeah, like, it seems like they told one version of the story, and then someone started, like, poking holes, and then they had to come up with something to fill that in. They're like, well, where'd you learn that? Oh, no, the angel visited me twice. And he just has to keep doing this. That's why it seems so fucking disorganized. So let me tell you what happened according to the fucking Book of Mormon in the intro pages. This is the testimony of fucking Joseph Smith. So the first visit, Moroni tells him about the golden plates and the seer stones, and then he gives him a vision and shows him where the plates are buried. And then he disappears, and he comes back a few seconds later, and he says all the same stuff he did the first visit, and then tells Smith about the coming judgments of earth, of like famine and pestilence and sword, whatever the fuck that means. I think he means war, but... and that all this would happen within Joseph Smith's generation. And then he disappears. And then he comes back again a few seconds later. In the third visit, he says all the same stuff he did in the other two visits. And then he tells Joseph Smith that the devil will try to tempt him and make him want to use the plates to get rich, and that he wasn't allowed to retrieve the plates if he had any other objective in his mind besides glorifying God.
So therefore, you know he wasn't trying to scam you.
Right?
Because the angel said it.
Yep. And then the next day he gets up and he starts working in the field and he gets really tired and he collapses. And when he comes to, Moroni tells Smith to go tell his father about everything that's happened so far. And so his father urges him to go to where the plates are and follow the instructions that the angel gave him. So he does. He goes to the place in his vision and he's able to find it. And he unearths the stone box with the two seer stones fixed to the breastplate, and he sees the plates, and then Moroni appears to him and says he's not allowed to take the plates, but instead he has to return to the burial site on the same day for 4 years to receive, like, lectures and stuff from Moroni. So that's an extremely garbled, like, doesn't make any fucking sense. This whole story so far is fucked.
So what was the name of the location of these plates, Michael?
They called it the Hill Cumorah.
Yeah, so it was called Cumorah, where he met Moroni. So if you want some evidence that Joseph Smith kind of made this shit up, there is an island off the coast of Madagascar called Comoro, with an O at the end. Guess what the capital is? Moroni.
Oh. Wow.
But Joseph Smith didn't have access to an atlas.
No, they wouldn't have made those. No, absolutely not.
No.
Because those are one of the many tools of the devil. Okay, so let's keep going. So, in 1827, Moroni entrusts the golden plates and the seer stones to Joseph Smith and charges him to protect them and translate them. And then he reports having faced much persecution and attempts to steal the plates during the translation process, even though technically he wasn't supposed to tell anybody, except for the people he was ordered to. And even if he was allowed to tell people, wouldn't that be the best way to protect them, is not tell anybody, so no one would know that you fucking have them? Like, that's just me. Then the Urim and the Thummim are taken away from Smith after the first 116 pages of the Book of Mormon are lost, along with previously translated pages of the 116 lost pages. Now, this is interesting. So, Joseph Smith never actually called the seer stones the Urim and the Thummim. Sorry, the Thummim. That's the other one. Until after 1833.
So the Urim and the whatever.
Thummim, yeah.
They're like seer stones that were used by Moses, right?
That's actually, yeah, that was the other thing. So during the year 1833, the same year they actually started calling them the Urim and the Thummim, it was because a close associate of Joseph Smith's, W. Phelps, he speculated that the ancient Nephite seer stones mentioned in the Book of Mormon could be the same Urim and Thummim in the Old Testament. And that speculation became popular, so popular in fact that the church rewrote sections of the Doctrines and Covenants to make sure that all references to the seer stones called them the Urim and the Thummim. So yeah, that's exactly it, pretty much.
Yeah, so, he was involved before this in so-called religious treasure hunting. Basically, he was using seer stones to find so-called treasure, and then he was eventually arrested for glass looking, which is a scamming technique. He would basically fleece people into kind of commissioning these trips that he would take to go find treasure using the seeing stones. Basically the same technique that he used for translating the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, we'll talk about that technique, actually go into detail, and it's the same technique he used for these treasure hunts, which, by the way, he never found any treasure, so there's that. So the seer stones themselves were rocks that Smith had acquired in his youth when digging out a well with his brother, Hiram, on Willard Chase's property. So he was digging out this well and he found these stones about 20 feet underground. They looked cool, so he kept them because he liked them. And then later on he claimed they were magic. And so he would often use these stones to receive divine revelation, including one instance where the stones actually told him who he should marry and who in turn should marry him. Okay, so let's keep going. So in 1829, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, which was a close associate of his, they claimed that John the Baptist appeared to them in a vision and conferred onto them the Aaronic priesthood. And basically we mentioned this a bit last time in our visit, but we got some of the details wrong. And this is how the church is organized in as far as titles go. So you got deacons, which are at the bottom. We got that one right. But you can be a deacon when you reach 12 years old. And a lot of their duties are like passing out bread and water during the sacrament, upkeeping the church grounds, acting as messengers between church leaders, and some special assignments every once in a while.
God, child labor.
Exactly, right? That's exactly what that is.
Wow, that's nifty.
And then you got teachers at age 14. They have all the same duties and powers as the deacon, as well as helping the church members live the commandments.
Yeah, the bad part about that is they got paid the same.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. But actually, this one's a little more in depth. So they make sure all the church members live the commandments, oftentimes by going to their homes and encouraging them to keep the commandments, like in their houses. That's a little intrusive.
Or did they break in or something?
I think they're invited.
No, they go in at night. And they just like stand over your bed and make sure that you're not masturbating.
Hands up! Above the sheets! Because that's not intrusive at all.
So they have a religious belief of like 10-year-olds. 14-year-olds, which is worse. They're going through puberty and everything. They're pissed off all the time. Oh, God.
So apparently the teachers are also the ones in charge of preparing the bread and water for sacrament. Then above them, you have priests, which are 16 years old, and they have all the same powers and duties as deacons and teachers, but they also have the ability to baptize people, administer the sacrament, ordain other priests, teachers, and deacons, and they can take charge of meetings if there are no other leadership present. And their main function is to preach the gospel to everyone around them, because that's not annoying at all.
Yeah, that's the best time to be preaching the gospel everywhere. That's going to make you a lot of friends.
Oh, yeah. And then above them is a bishop. And the bishop presides over the Aaronic priesthood in a ward. So he's like in charge of their unit. His main duty is to administer finances, records, directing care for the poor and needy. He's also considered a high priest, which is in the next priesthood, when he's in charge of a ward. He's also considered a judge in Israel, conducts interviews for members of temple recommendations, priesthood ordainments, things like that. Oh, and he also has the right to have the gift of discernment. And it's the same discernment that's talked about in Acts 16, the ability to distinguish between those words, deeds, and appearances which are true and those which are false.
Is that the same as discerning the spirits? Is that what they're talking about?
It's basically like, when false Christians try to preach false, messages and convert people into a false religion.
Right, so Joel Osteen.
Yeah, he has the ability to see through that and be like, oh no, they're really preaching the devil, because I can see it. I can discern their bullshit.
Oh, so it's not like they can see under their skin and see Joel Osteen is really a lizard person?
No, not yet. No.
Okay. He totally is, though.
So, apparently during that same encounter, Peter, James, and John also appear to Smith and Cowdery. They explain the Melchizedek priesthood, and they give them the keys to the kingdom of God. And then later, Moses, Ellis, and Elijah give them the keys to the priesthood, as well as the sealing power for polygamy and eternal marriage. The second priesthood is kind of like the higher-ups. This is like the main management sort of deal. We didn't really deal with a lot of these people.
It's the made men.
Yeah. So we didn't really deal with a lot of these people when we went to the church, but you got elders, which were actually the missionaries that we talked to. They were all considered elders. Their job is to teach, expound, exhort, baptize, and watch over the church, bestow the gift of the Holy Spirit by the laying on of hands, conduct meetings of the church, administer to the sick, bless little children, preside over church meetings when no high priest is present. That's basically the entirety of that position. Above them, you have high priests, and they have the authority to officiate in the church, administer spiritual things, whatever the fuck that means, and officiate all lesser offices. So they're kind of like the manager, I guess. And then, of course, you got patriarchs, and their main function is giving patriarchal blessings, but they're also considered high priests. And then above them, you got what they call a 70, which is a special witness of Jesus to the world, and they assist in building up and regulating the church over the direction of the first president and the 12 apostles. So they're kind of like upper management, sort of. And then the apostles, there's usually apparently only 12 of them at a time. An apostle administers the affairs of the church all over the world through the use of the keys to the kingdom of God. So basically, you've got, big sections of the world that are, this apostle is in charge of this stuff, this apostle is in charge of this stuff. So they're the highest level of management underneath the president. So that's how the hierarchy works, we came to find out. In 1830, Jesus directs Joseph Smith to organize the Mormon church and translate the golden plates into the Book of Mormon. And this is actually, I think, when he finishes his translation. So, according to David Whitmer, Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon by putting the seer stone in a hat and then putting his face in the hat. And he was able to read the story one character at a time off of a piece of magic parchment that would appear in the darkness. And he was able to read it with the English interpretation written underneath the character. And any of the scribes involved in the translation process were strictly forbidden from seeing any of the plates. In fact, it seems that the golden plates were never actually used during the translation process because they were still buried in the woods, apparently, in the Hill Cumorah. All he would use is the seer stones. Mm-hmm. And that was the same process that, when we talked about earlier, Joseph Smith would use when he would go treasure hunting but never found any treasure.
By the way, I was thinking about the concept of golden plates.
Yeah.
And I don't know, in my ancient archaeology class, we're talking about certain tablets that were found, and they're written in, an ancient Greek language or something like that, and they're always on clay tablets. Well, clay isn't very ductile, but gold is.
Yeah.
So, I really wonder, why would gold be used as a way of, writing down stuff like that? That's supposed to be not decorative, but passing on such important information. It seems like there could be a better way.
Because spooky Egypt stuff.
Spooky Egypt stuff. Well, then why didn't it have onyx and stuff?
But because they were in the Americas, so it was American Egypt stuff. But it was spooky.
Right, so it was Egypt, but spookier. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Got it.
1838, Moroni takes the plates from Joseph Smith and delivers them to heaven after only 11 people ever saw them, apparently, all of whom had clear motivation to perpetuate the story. However, upon further research, I found out that the statements from the 11 witnesses, the testimony of 3 and the testimony of 8, were apparently written by Joseph Smith himself, and then he pressured everybody into signing them, although they admitted later they never actually saw the plates with their earthly eyes, but rather with their spiritual eyes.
Right. So it's like Donald Trump and his doctor, like, you know, when the election was happening, where the guy was like, "Oh yeah, he's like the most top. He's like a fucking athlete, man. He's like 7 feet tall and he's 195 pounds. Totally,
his dick
healthy.
is like 10 feet long."
Yeah. By the way, about that, I heard that I have no idea if this is true, but that Donald Trump drove up in the back of a limo to the doctor's office. Somebody walked in with a paper and walked out, and that was his visit to the doctor's office.
I heard that as well. Actually. That does
Yeah,
sound
so
familiar.
I imagine it's the same thing, you know?
Well, actually, it gets even more intense than that.
Oh,
so I did even
great.
more research. Apparently, there's one claim that the witnesses were made to go through religious rituals coupled with fasting. So basically, the witnesses were put in a room and they were shown a box, and they were told that the plates were in the box, and then they were told to imagine the plates in the box. And eventually, after hours of doing this, they were persuaded that they had actually seen the plates with their spiritual eyes. Of course, pretty much everybody involved in this was already very superstitious. For example, Martin Harris, who was like super religious, he actually talked about one day he claimed that he was walking through the forest on his way to go to town or something, and he reportedly saw Jesus take the form of a deer, walk beside him, and talk to him the whole way. And he also saw the devil, who is a very slick, black-haired man, kind of like a swanky greaser, I guess. So everybody involved was already pretty heavily superstitious, and the time period lends to a lot of superstition. But Martin Harris also reported that he said to only have ever seen an object covered by a piece of cloth that Smith said were the golden plates. But Smith told Harris that if he were to look upon the plates, God would kill him.
Oh, wow. I love the hallucinations there. Like,
Yeah.
some guy rubbed up against a poison mushroom or something like that, and he thinks that Jesus is a fucking deer.
Yeah. That was so weird. I read that. I was like, are you serious?
Oh my
Like,
God.
what the fuck? So the other explanation I heard was that Oliver Cowdery was a blacksmith, so he definitely would have had the ability to make a set of plates to fool the witnesses. And Smith claimed that like 2/3 of the plates were sealed anyway, so he wouldn't have had to made those. He would only had to made a few plates to have tricked all the witnesses into thinking they saw something like that. Although, you know, that theory doesn't have a lot of traction, it's entirely within the realm of possibility. So
Yeah,
there's
so-
that to consider.
So I was actually a little bit confused about that. You said that like a third of the book was sealed.
Mhm.
Like, are they thinking that the rest of it is going to be revealed at some time?
Yeah, so I think this goes along with the lost 116 pages. You know, when God got angry at Joseph Smith for losing the first 100,
yeah.
and then he said he could never translate from those pages again, and now they're fucking sealed or whatever. So I think that's what he meant. And those were the ones that, of course, the angel took along with the Urim and Thummim. So,
Right. Oh, and all of the archaeological evidence of the Nephites and the Lamanites in America.
yeah, which we're actually going to talk about next. That's the next thing on the list.
That's called a segue, Michael. We did a thing.
High five! Woo! So the next thing we talked about was the story of Lehi and Nephi's journey to the Americas in 600 BC. So I did research about this one before we went to the meeting. So these were the problems I presented to them about how did they get from Jerusalem to America. There was a route proposed by a bishop and high priest named John L. Sorensen, and he basically said that they would have sailed from the Arabian Peninsula around India to the Malayan Peninsula, through the islands of the South Pacific and across the Pacific to around 14 degrees north latitude in Mesoamerica. Now, the problem with that is the ship technology available in 600 BC would definitely not have been able to make that voyage, especially not for the Jaredites, who were supposed to have gone a lot earlier, like 2000 BC or something like that. They definitely wouldn't have made it. Mm-hmm. Now, the big problem was they had what was called an outside steer oar system. So basically, this meant that because the ships typically had what they called a shallow draft, they had very little resistance against the wind. So the wind would be pushing the ship everywhere, and you had very little ability to fight that wind resistance. There was actually a case in 1183, which was about 583 years after Lehi and Nephi's proposed voyage, where a similar ship sailed from Sicily, and it passed Crete, but it passed it 3 times. Because, it kept getting pushed back and tried to, So it did this 3 fucking times. So this would have obviously been a huge fucking problem.
Yeah, it's like in the Odyssey. I mean, that was like one of the major driving forces of the plot is
He couldn't control where the fuck he was going.
Exactly.
That would have been the exact same problem. Ships capable of making that kind of voyage wouldn't have been created or even designed until the mid-15th century with the caravel ships in Portugal. So we're in the wrong time period, we're in the wrong place, wrong area of the world, and we're about 850 years removed from Lehi and Nehi's journey.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big issue. They also claim to have sailed across the Pacific to reach the Americas. However, they would have been sailing against opposing winds and currents, and this was not possible until the 17th century because seamanship wasn't there yet. In fact, in the 16th century, an explorer, Cervada, under the direction of Hernan Cortez, attempted to sail back across the Pacific to hook up with Spain in a more direct route to report back over what they had done in the Americas. And he failed for 3 years before he gave up and just went the normal way that they had come.
Mm-hmm.
So the amount of knowledge required to navigate that sea would not be available until about 1,000 years after Lehi and Nephi's journey.
Yeah, so the explanation that we got from that was pretty underwhelming. Like they could have come up with something a lot better, like, hey, what about all the people who are in like Hawaii and Samoa? Yeah. How did they get there? I mean, they had boats. But no, they went with the God did it.
Or no, even better, they went with cause magic. Because God played a part, but there was also a lot of magic involved. So
yeah, well, it was God magic. So
God magic, yeah. So they basically said that in order to combat the ship problem, God helped them design the ships, and they were like of a submarine design. The problem with this is they would have had no ability to steer, which of course they combat with, oh, well, God steered the ship for them. And they had a magic compass called the Liahona, and it worked according to Nephi's faith. So basically, if anybody else tried to use the compass, it wouldn't work, but it would point them the direction they needed to go because it was working according to Nephi's faith in God.
That sounds like an awesome Mormon artifact right there. What happened to it, Michael?
The angel took it. The angel took it to heaven, so we don't have that. That fucking angel taking all the physical evidence.
Yeah, little fucking kleptomaniac angel.
What a dick.
Like nobody told him to take it. He just decided.
He just took it.
He's like,
give me that shit.
In his heavenly mansion, he's just got a whole bunch of like fucking religious artifacts.
I think they also said he took a sword called the Sword of Laban. He stole a sword too, just cause. So then they also told us that apparently the church offers no clear stance on exactly where the Nephites made landfall, because most of the landmarks they described in the Book of Mormon were destroyed in an earthquake after the crucifixion of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find an account of a worldwide earthquake ever, much less around 30 to 35 AD. The closest we found was, 800 years after the crucifixion in Iran in 856, recorded at a magnitude of 8.0. Not a worldwide earthquake, though, just local, but that's come on. A worldwide earthquake? Seriously?
Actually, I've heard explanations of this worldwide earthquake from a Christian perspective, because, they obviously have a vested interest in proving that this thing happened.
Sure.
So basically, the apologetic was, well, the Holy of Holies, the Sanctum Sanctorum, it had this veil, and the veil was like 8 inches thick. So it said that after the earthquake, the veil was ripped. Well, how strong would an earthquake have to be to rip cloth that was 8 inches thick?
Oh, wait, I think I have heard this. Yeah, I've heard that argument. That's... Fucking apologists, man. Fucking apologists.
It's great.
I'll give you a hint. It's not a worldwide earthquake. It's not that fucking strong. Okay? Like, give you a fucking hint on that one. That would mean, like, all the plates on the planet would just have simultaneously gone. Like, the whole planet's having a simultaneous earthquake.
So you know what I have to say to you, though, Michael?
What?
You weren't there.
You weren't there. You don't know. You weren't there. I'm sorry, Ken Ham. It's different, like, when you were there to see the earthquake, I guess. So we all just have to defer to Ken Ham.
Okay. So, speaking of archaeology, I got a couple of things. So I heard a story about this biblical archaeologist who had worked in the Middle East, and he took a trip to Utah, and he went to the Mormon museum.
Yeah.
And he asked one of the workers there, like, where's all the Nephite pottery?
Yeah.
It's like, well, we don't have
the angel
any
took
of
it.
Yeah, he's like the person working there was like, we don't have any. You'll have to go to Brigham Young University to see it. So he went to BYU. Mm-hmm. And he asked one of the, one of the archaeologists there where all the Nephite pottery was, because this guy had been studying Jewish archaeology for quite a while. And
mm-hmm.
so, the Hebrews have very distinct and keyword findable artifacts that were left over by their culture. So he figured if this whole thing was true, then there should be a lot of similarities between the Nephite pottery and the Jewish pottery. So he was like, where's the pottery? And the guy, according to this story, I don't know if this is true, but the guy at BYU was like, all right, so we don't really have any. Like, there is none. Yeah, but then in the video, the guy went on to point out that basically there's, like, in the Book of Mormon, there are these battles that are described where, like, millions of people die.
Yeah, it's like 2.2 million or something like that. Some ridiculous number, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, and we have no evidence of that at all. We have no helmets, we have no swords, we have nothing.
Yeah, that's such bullshit. I mean, we're still finding evidence from the fucking Civil War and the American Revolution, because those were huge-scale wars, and they left a ton of fucking evidence.
Yeah, but not even that. Like, we get evidence of battles that were like tiny battles, like skirmishes in the ancient Mediterranean.
Oh yeah,
like we find boar tusk helmets and arrow tips.
Yeah, yeah. Like it would have left some kind of evidence if there was a battle that fucking big, especially multiple battles that big.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then just compare the amount of archaeological evidence for the stuff in the Bible. It doesn't compare at all. It's like I don't obviously believe the myths of the Bible are true, but it does have a lot of like references to things that are real.
Oh yeah.
Like perfect example is the Hittites. Mm-hmm. They're referenced in the Bible, but we didn't actually have proof that they existed until very, very recently.
Yeah.
And then there's the city of Ur, which I believe is in Iraq right now.
Yeah.
Referred to in Genesis as the origin of Abraham. And then there's places like Thyatira, which is the modern city of Akhisar in Turkey. And then there's, the ones that are still around like Corinth and Thessaloniki. And it's like you compare the archaeological evidence for the Bible to the Book of Mormon. There's fucking nothing. Yeah. They have fucking nothing.
Yeah, it's really bad. It's really sad.
I doubt that we even have archaeological evidence from like the 1840s of Mormonism. Oh, God, it fucking pisses me off, man.
Yeah, that's one of the things, like, every time we'd ask about physical evidence, they'd be like, oh, the angel took it, or it's lost, or it was destroyed. Like, they seem to have a shocking lack of physical evidence, and yet wholeheartedly believe these claims.
Mm-hmm. Right, and wasn't there supposed to be some sort of landmark where they made land in the Americas?
Yeah, but it was destroyed in the earthquake when Jesus got crucified.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's what happened, yeah. Or the angel took it, one of the two.
Or both. Hey, maybe that was why. Like, he saw his opportunity when the earthquake came, and he was like, everybody's distracted, and he just went around and stole it.
He took he's all like, the pottery. No, guys, I think it was destroyed. Oh no, what happened?
Yeah, he took all the pottery. He took all the weapons and evidence of battles, and he took all of. He took everything.
The horse carcasses. Compass. He took all the horse carcasses.
And the steel. And the wheels.
And all the wheels.
Okay, now we need to talk about some of those anachronisms now.
Well, actually, we're kind of getting into a section where we can dive into some of that. So,
Yeah.
Ryan had a question about the Book of Mormon being written in Reformed Egyptian.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, Reformed Egyptian is supposed to be an amalgam of Hebrew and Egyptian hieroglyphics. And their explanation was that Nephi and Lehi spoke Hebrew because they were from Jerusalem, but they wrote in Egyptian hieroglyphics. So over time, the language evolved to where the writing was reminiscent of Egyptian hieroglyphics, but the grammar and syntax structure would have been what was used in like conversational Hebrew. So it kind of mixed into an amalgam of the two languages. The obvious criticism is that there's not enough time for a language to evolve that drastically. Like, we're only talking about a 1,000-year period beginning to end in the Book of Mormon. The earliest written Latin inscription was in the 6th century BC. Now, the first use of Spanish, which is a language that was derived from Latin, the first use of Spanish was in the 13th century. So it took approximately 1,800 years for Spanish to be derived from Latin, and they expect us to believe that two dissident languages could be combined into one language in under 1,000.
Right. So, I mean, it's not
Bullshit.
like that's not possible, but, you know, the thing that really bothers me about that, though, is the whole thing, like, Reformed Egyptian is actually a thing. It's called Coptic. It's a language that's spoken.
Yeah.
And the whole idea that it's a mixture of Hebrew and Egyptian is ridiculous, by the way. If you read some of the fucking names and shit that are in there that are supposed to be from Reformed Egyptian, it's like, I've never studied Hebrew, but I have studied Arabic, and they're related languages. Let me find one of the words that I saw in there. It's, okay, supposedly a Hebrew word, Ryu Ki Yang. Does that sound Hebrew to you?
No, it almost sounds Chinese.
Yeah, I saw it, and especially the way that it's written, it looks like somebody's trying to make fun of Korean.
Yeah, like, that sounds like an Asian language, not Hebrew.
So that's supposed to be Hebrew.
The fuck?
And so, God, this guy's just fucking milking it, man. He's just making this shit up.
Pretty much. So this is actually kind of funny. This leads into our next point, where there was a lot of Egyptophilia going on at this time period. Everybody's really crazy about Egypt, but there was very little information out there about Egypt. So one story that comes to mind is how Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Abraham.
Yeah.
And this was like right in the middle of this Egyptophilia craze. And so there's this guy named Michael H. Chandler, and he was a traveling salesman who was commissioned to sell Egyptian artifacts on behalf of wealthy businessmen for a modest commission. During his travels, he heard about Joseph Smith's ability to translate ancient languages, so he traveled out to Kirtland, Ohio in 1835, after the Book of Mormon was written, and sold him a series of ancient Egyptian scrolls along with 4 mummies for the sum of $2,400. Joseph Smith looked at these scrolls and immediately claimed he could read some of the hieroglyphics, enough to the point where he could tell that these were writings written by Abraham and Joseph, although he needed more time to fully translate the scrolls. So he begins his translation. It takes him a while, but he finally publishes 3 facsimiles, or recreations of the hieroglyphics, and he serially releases them in a Mormon newspaper called The Times and Seasons in 1842, but they were later canonized into the Pearl of Great Price in 1880. And the knowledge of how to translate Egyptian writings would not be available in the Americans until well after the 1860s, so it's not like anybody could fact-check him and call him on his bullshit. Now, the Book of Abraham has 5 chapters, and I'll briefly tell you what is in each of the chapters. Chapter 1 recounts how Abraham's father Terah and his forefathers turned to the god of, Elikanach, and the god of Libnah, and the god of Mohrach, and the god of Korash, and the god of Pharaoh. Yeah, these are all really strange names. Korash.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Korash. And the god of Pharaoh, who is the king of Egypt at the time. Chadlin priests were sacrificing virgins to pagan gods of stone and wood, and one priest attempted to sacrifice Abraham himself, and then an angel comes and rescues him, and then the text examines the origins of Egypt and its government. And then you get to chapter 2, which basically includes information about God's covenant with Abraham and how it would be fulfilled, and Abraham travels from Ur to Canaan and then to Egypt. Then we get to the 3rd chapter where Abraham learns about an Egyptian understanding of the celestial objects called the Urim and Thummim, which, yeah. And then in this chapter, Abraham also learns about the eternal nature of spirits and pre-earth life and foreordainment and creation and the choosing of a redeemer and the second estate of man. And finally, chapters 4 and 5 both contain expansions and modifications of the creation narrative in Genesis. So chapter 4 focuses on the gods, and again, plural. This was kind of a big thing at the time where they were saying it was actually a plurality of gods all kind of coming in and working on a joint project together when they created the universe. And in chapter 5, all the gods complete the creation, and then Adam names all the living creatures, which is kind of similar to how the Genesis account works.
Mm-hmm.
In 1966, the scrolls that Joseph Smith had translated were found, actually, because for a while they were lost and they thought to have been destroyed in the Great Chicago Fire, but they were actually found, and in 2001, Dr. Robert Rittner, an associate professor of Egyptology at the University of Chicago, was commissioned to do an actual translation of the scroll which contained the Book of Abraham. So it turns out this is just a prayer scroll written for an Egyptian priest, probably named Horus, and Abraham is never mentioned. The points at which the facsimiles seem to deviate from like what is normal in regular Egyptian hieroglyphics seem to be the points where the scroll was torn, ripped, missing, or overly degraded. So you see this like kind of patchwork. It's like, you know how old scrolls look. There's like big chunks missing and they have tears and stuff.
Yeah.
Basically, whenever there was a tear, he would like draw in whatever he wanted and just say it was part of the hieroglyph because he could read it.
Oh, God.
So apparently there were some people who actually defended the Book of Abraham from the Mormon Church. They argued that the original scroll Smith translated was 10 feet long, and they had only discovered fragments of the 10-foot long scroll in 1960 and translated in 2001. But the rest of the 10 feet contained the Book of Abraham, but it was lost, so we can't know.
It was taken by an angel.
It was taken by the angel. Fuck. So another Mormon apologetic said that Joseph Smith was looking at the pictorial hieroglyphics and was divinely inspired to write the Book of Abraham. I guess he likes picture books.
So he was inspired.
He was inspired
by the pretty pictures.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so Michael, I went through and I got a selection from some of these so-called translations.
Oh boy, let's listen to this.
If you like astrology, this is some pretty good shit.
Oh,
if you can fucking understand it. Okay, so this starts off with facsimile number 2. Kolob, signifying the first creation, nearest to the celestial, or the residence of God, first in government, and the last pertaining to the measurement of time. The measurement of time according to celestial time, which celestial time signifies 1 day, to a cubit.
Okay. All right.
Okay. 1 day in Kolob is equal to 1,000 years according to the measurement of this earth, which is called by the Egyptians Ja-Oe.
Ja-Oe.
That's true. Answers to the Hebrew word Ryuki Yang, which is Korean. It's the Korean Hebrews. Signifying expanse or the firmament of the heavens, also a numerical figure. In Egyptian, signifying 1,000, answering to the measurement of time of Obelish, which is equal to with Kolob in its revolution and its measuring of time. What the fuck is he talking about?
He's just making shit up. He's just pulling stuff out of his ass.
This is almost over. Okay.
God.
It is called in Egyptian Inish Go Adosh.
Because that sounds very Egyptian.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I don't know Egyptian, so I can't tell you if it's right or wrong. I'll just have to trust him.
Okay.
Which, by the way, okay, so this was supposedly translated from Egyptian, and this part says, it is called in Egyptian, Inish Go on Dosh. What the fuck is he translating then? What the fuck does that mean? This is one of the governing planets also, and is said by the Egyptians to be the sun. And its light is borrowed from Kolob through the medium of K.E. Yanrash.
Okay.
Which is the grand key, or in other words, the governing power, which governs 15 other fixed planets with stars. Also, the Floese, or the moon.
Floese.
Floese sounds like a laxative. The Earth and the Sun and their annual revolutions. This planet receives its power through the medium of Kili Flosues, or Hakokubim.
He's just making shit up.
Dragon Ball Z.
Come on, he's just making shit up. It should be so fucking obvious.
The stars represented by numbers 22 and 23 receiving light from the revolutions of Kolob. What the fuck?
Whatever. Just whatever, Joseph Smith. You're a fucker.
So the sun receives its power from Kolob, a planet.
Yeah. Because, God magic.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So not gifted with understanding cosmology, that one. Clearly not.
Yeah, or fucking English words. Or, let alone Egyptian or Hebrew words.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Thanks for listening to the Unholy Generations podcast with your hosts Mike
and Ryan. If you want to contact us, send us an email at unholypod@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, like our episodes, subscribe to our channel, and share us on all your social media.
Follow us on our Twitter at UnholyGens, like us on Facebook at the Unholy Generation Podcast, and follow us on SoundCloud.
And tune into our next episode, which is going to be part 2 of our Mormon experience.